Hello, and welcome once again to Beatle University. I am Professor Moptop, and as we continue to learn lots and lots and lots about those Beatles, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Sgt. Pepper. Even though we spent a lot of time talking about it a little while back, Sgt. Pepper is turning 50 years old, and for the occasion, I have 50 facts about the album, in no order whatsoever. I'm going to call it our 5450. We'll start at the benefit of Mr. Kite.
For the benefit of Mr. Kite.
For the benefit of Mr. Kite, this is...
Mr. Kite uses 19 pieces of tape, randomly edited together to create a series of sound effects that would invoke the senses of a carnival or a circus. John Lennon wanted the listeners to be able to smell the sawdust. For the Sgt. Pepper reprise, all four Beatles played together live while facing one another as they stood in a circle. The Sgt. Pepper title track was written by Paul, with a little bit of help from Beatle insider Mal Evans after a conversation about salt and pepper. Just think, it could have easily been Salt and Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. She's Leaving Home doesn't feature any Beatle playing an instrument at all, but it does have Sheila Bromberg on the harp, who is the first woman to perform in a Beatle track. That is not counting Marika Kroger of The Fool, who shook a tambourine on A Day in the Life, which was originally called In the Life of. Within You Without You is the only instance of the word illusion in a Beatles song. Lovely Rita Metermaid may have been written about a female cop named Meta Davies, who wrote a traffic ticket to Paul McCartney, who had run out of time on his parking meter. When I'm 64 was inspired by McCartney's father, who was the leader and trumpeter of the Jimmy Mac Jazz Band. It was written by McCartney when he was 16. That's a bonus fact. In the inside packaging of the Sgt. Pepper album, there were cutouts, a fake mustache, some military-looking Sergeant decorations, and a picture of Sgt. Pepper himself, who is not on the cover of the album. I think it's because he took the picture. Getting Better was inspired by session drummer and Ringo Phil and Jimmy Nicol, who would use the phrase, "It's getting better," after they would ask him each night, "How was the show tonight?" And the animal sound effects for Good Morning, Good Morning were compiled from several different sound effects library tapes. From Volume 35, Animals and Bees, they used a lion, an elephant, a dog, a sheep, a cow, and a cat. And from Volume 57, Fox Hunt, they used a dog chasing some foxes and galloping horses. These sound effects were all placed in a special order, as to insinuate that each animal is being chased by the next one. Although this does sort of turn into just a random barnyard stampede eventually. On the cover, Shirley Temple is on it 3 times. Once by the wax statue Beatles, once next to Marlene Dietrich, and once in doll form, where she has a Welcome Rolling Stones Good Guys shirt on. Also, Bob Dylan and Dylan Thomas are both on the cover as well. And Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds inspired a crew of French geologists to name their discovery of a 3-million-year-old skeleton after Lennon's psychedelic-sounding song. They listened to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds again and again as they celebrated their remarkable finding. Technically, the fossil is the AL-288-1. Lucy O'Donnell was the real-life inspiration for Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Julian Lennon drew a picture of her in the sky with diamonds. Sadly, Lucy passed away in 2009 at the very young age of 46, which is considerably less than 3 million, which Lucy was. And while we're talking about numbers, there are 91 outside musicians on the Pepper LP. Some of them are on more than one song. Fixin' a Hole may have been inspired by a 1956 Elvis Presley song called We're Gonna Move.
Well, there's a hole in the roof where the rain pours in, a hole in the floor where it runs right out again.
Penny Lane was recorded during the sessions, but was released as a single before the album came out, and it probably has 7 different pianos, either standard or electric, and all of them were either slowed down or sped up or dealt with in some sort of audio fashion, and of course they were layered on top of one another. George's Within You Without You was actually his second offering to the album. His first was Only a Northern Song, which George Martin had to delicately tell him wasn't quite up to standards. They would save the song and include it for the Yellow Submarine project. Beatle assistant Neil Aspinall plays the tambora on Within You Without You, although he had probably never played it before or after. And thanks to overdubs, Paul McCartney plays the rhythm guitar, the bass guitar, and the lead guitar on the title track of the album. Part of the audio at the beginning of the album was recorded during the Day in the Life sessions as 41 musicians tuned up. McCartney wanted to record the room. That noise was combined with some sound effects from Volume 28, audience applause and laughter. A bit later in the song, yet more sound effects, this time from Volume 6, applause and laughter. A Day in the Life was written by John Lennon in January of '67 after reading a copy of the Daily Mail which had an article about holes in the road.
I read the news today, oh boy. 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire.
Ringo's lead vocal contribution to the album was With a Little Help from My Friends, which was briefly called the Badfinger Boogie. And the song has its own crowd noise as well, this time from an actual Beatle performance from the Hollywood Bowl in 1965. For being, for the benefit of Mr. Kite, John took many of the lyrics directly from an antique poster that he bought. William Kite was the real-life Mr. K. And although Ringo only sings lead on one track, which is of course With a Little Help from My Friends, he sings background on the Sgt. Pepper title track and the reprise. Ringo also plays bells on When I'm 64.
Grandchildren on your knee. Vera, Chuck, and Dave.
On Lovely Rita Meter Maid, all 4 Beatles performed an unusual overdub, which consisted of them playing homemade kazoos created with toilet tissue and combs. And at the very end of A Day in the Life, they created a big piano chord by using 4 pianos played by 5 guys. These 5 guys were John Lennon, George Martin, Mal Evans, Paul McCartney, and Ringo Starr. Within You Without You has some session musicians from the Asian Music Circle of North London. These musicians are uncredited and their names have never been revealed. Think about how cool it is to play on Sgt. Pepper and kinda have it be a secret. She's Leaving Home was inspired by an article in the newspaper about a rich runaway named Melanie Coe, who Paul actually crossed paths with a few years before he wrote the song when he was a judge for a dance contest on Ready, Steady, Go. When the band recorded Fixin' a Hole, a guy who was said to be Jesus Christ was invited into the studio to hang out and watch as long as he didn't cause any trouble. Apparently Jesus behaved, and he also had tea with McCartney. Tea with Jesus sounds kind of like a concept album in its own right. During a recording session for Getting Better, Lennon took a bit too much acid, or maybe the wrong acid. After spending a little time on the roof of the studio, he had to be driven home by McCartney, who finally took his debut dose and indoctrinated himself into the world of LSD. Like Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields Forever was recorded during the sessions, but released before the album came out. And there's actually 2 different versions of Strawberry Fields spliced together, a slow one.
No one I think is in my tree.
And a fast one.
I mean, it must be high or low.
Neil Aspinall and Mal Evans joined the 4 Beatles in singing the background vocals for the title track.
Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Sit back and let the evening go.
Ringo, who had a lot of downtime during the sessions, learned to play chess.
It's a fine album, but I did learn to play chess on it.
After the end of the big crash in A Day in the Life, there's a high-pitched piece of noise that humans can't actually hear, but dogs can. Good Morning mentions Meet the Wife, a British sitcom from England starring Freddie Finton.
When I was having the baby, you were off out on a dark out. Where are you going to?
I'm going to the spare room on the old bed.
Oh, no, listen, Freddie, you can't do that, love, because we've never slept apart before.
We've never had a spare bed before.
No, Freddie, come back here.
And that last chicken noise at the end of Good Morning is almost exactly the same note as the first guitar note on the Sgt. Pepper reprise. When I'm 64 was written by Paul when he was only a teenager, and he would perform it on the piano when the power would go out. Sadly, none of these performances were ever recorded, likely because there was no power, and that's a fact. And it's a sad fact that he blew his mind out in a car was a line inspired by a real-life friend, Tara Braun, who got into a deadly car wreck. It's also a sad fact that when George first presented Within You Without You to George Martin and the other Beatles, he played it solo, alone, on an acoustic guitar, and sang, and it wasn't recorded. What was recorded was George Martin's harpsichord in the beginning of Fixin' a Hole. When A Day in the Life had its big orchestral overdub sessions, the Beatles threw a party with balloons and streamers and stuff. In attendance was Donovan, Mike Nesmith, a couple of Rolling Stones, Marianne Faithfull, and drugs. The Sgt. Pepper reprise is the only song to not have any speed manipulation involved. Adolf Hitler was at one point going to be part of the Sgt. Pepper cover, but it was deemed offensive. The Beatles were also trendsetters in the world of political correctness. Jesus Christ, who was not the same guy from the Fixin' a Hole session, but instead a cutout of Jesus Christ, was also considered for inclusion of the album, but it was left to the side, primarily due to the fact that Lennon had the whole bigger than Jesus thing just the year before. At the very end of Lovely Rita, as the band played longer than expected, you can hear John say, "Have 'em leave it." And fact number 50. When they were first recording A Day in the Life, they weren't sure what was going to go in the spot where the big swoosh would wind up, but they knew it was going to be 24 measures long. So they had assistant Mal Evans count, adding a bit of echo with each number. And when he hit 24, it was time for everyone to pay attention. For this, Mel rings the alarm clock. And with that, we have presented 50 random facts about Sgt. Pepper, or 5450, if you will. I hope you learned a little bit of something. Join me back here next time, and we will again move forward in our attempt to learn everything about the Beatles. Until then, class dismissed. I am Professor Moptop.
1, 2, 3, 4.
A Moptop production.
Very good.